Akim is the CEO of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Gabon and is leading the biggest ever transaction by a sovereign, carbon credit transaction. Could you please speak about that transaction, Akim?
Sure, Yinka. And let me say that I'm really happy to be here and to share that our perspective on the topic. This is an historical transaction because it's the largest ever issuance of sovereign carbon credits that has happened. We're talking about 90 million tons of carbon credits coming from the forest with tremendous co-benefits for it. And actually, the critical element of this issuance is the multiplier effect that it will present for the remaining rainforest countries.
Okay. And so you've mentioned rainforest countries. What makes Gabon unique?
What makes Gabon unique? Then you're going to say that I'm biased, right? What makes Gabon unique is it's the only country in the OPEC, all producing, exporting countries, but it at the same time can boast to be a super green power. Gabon is 88% covered by forest. We have 600 kilometers of coastline, and with the last habitat for forest elephant on the continent. So that's the reality. But let me turn to the audience first. How many people have been to Gabon, or at least know where Gabon is? Yeah. So half the room doesn't know where the lungs are, because actually Gabon is in the Congo Basin, and the Congo Basin is the last lung of the world, since now the Amazon is a net emitter. So this is our last defense line in the battle against climate change. And so that's what makes that carbon issuance unique, because so far Gabon has been committed and doing this stewardship of the forest on our own budget. Now what we're saying is, we did make the choice not to make the choice between our development challenges and the stewardship of the forest. But now we need solidarity from the rest of the world, because we cannot continue that effort alone. And we're not asking for handouts or grants or donations. We're coming with a product, and we want to have these constructive conversations.
And so what's been the market response to your issuance so far?
I would say that very promising, because we were in the process of validating those carbon credits, which has been done a couple of weeks ago. So we're having now a conversation more about which way to go in terms of road to market. Do we want to do a bilateral transaction? Do we want to put some on the marketplace? These are the conversations we're having, and we're confident that will land in the coming weeks. I mean, we hope for all of us that we will land in the coming weeks.
Okay, and leading up, I mean, the coming weeks is quite soon. What are the questions that investors are asking? What are their concerns around the issuance?
Since we have the advantage and also the challenge of maybe being the first one, I mean, this is a breakthrough transaction. We're opening doors. So there's some part of education that has to be done to really understand how we created those carbon credits, how that the result of groundbreaking policies that have been put in place in Gabon for the past couple of decades. We're talking 50 years, and when we look about those carbon, vintage carbon that were created between 2010 and 2018, so there's this discussion, and also about, obviously we have the discussion about integrity and quality, and the answer in Gabon also is like, for those points, they're not really relevant, because the country itself is the most absorbing country in terms of CO2 in the world, so we absorb more than we emit. Gabon today absorb about 140 million tons of carbon, and we emit 35 million tons of carbon. So we have a net sequestration of more than 100 million tons every year. Just in terms of order of magnitude, we're talking about a third of France's emission or a fourth of the UK emission that is being absorbed by the forest in Gabon.
Okay, and in terms of African credits and the participation of Africa in the carbon credit market, African credits account for about 15% of traded volume. That was for 2021. What needs to happen to unlock that market so that more African projects and sovereigns can tap it?
Yes, I mean, you even took, you even gave the data of the share of the Africa, but when you look even at the voluntary carbon market as a whole, we're talking about 200 million tons that were traded in 2021. On the other hand, you have more than 50 billion tons of emissions every year. So definitely, we really need to unlock scale and speed in this market if we really mean to address the challenge that is at stake. So one of the solutions, obviously, is what we're bringing to the market. The market should understand that the need to work also with sovereigns on these emissions. And obviously, the voluntary carbon market and the sovereign carbon market have to work together.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier about Gabon being an OPEC nation. And now it's kind of becoming a climate finance pioneer for the continent. Was that a deliberate effort to pivot towards climate finance?
I wouldn't say that's the thing. Since it's deliberate, it's not really pivoting. I mean, Gabon has been in the stewardship of the environment even before it was front page news, yeah? Actually, even before Greta was born. So it's been 50 years that the government of Gabon has embarked on this journey. 1992, we had our first sustainable development law. In 2006, we created a network of national parks which cover more than 13% of our land mass. 2010, we decided to ban the export of raw logs, which was really a hit for our economy. But that's the decision that the leadership took. And now, 10 years down the road, we're reaping the benefits of it. So it's definitely it's deliberate, and now I would even say that our laws are written with the pen of sustainability.
And you've given a bit of the environmental history of Gabon, but we also know from a governance history, Gabon has had the same family in power for a few decades. Does that show up in the conversations that you have with investors, the issue of governance?
It doesn't show in any form or shape because the reality is, I'm sorry, I don't know, maybe you don't know, I'm not a minister. So it doesn't, I'm in rooms with investors, with financial expert, climate expert, and we're looking for solutions to save the world. So that doesn't, no, it doesn't come up into that conversation. It's really, I get the type of question you asked me earlier about the quality of the product, and these are the conversations we're having about the integrity of the product, because this is really what we're focusing on. And again, if the underlying question to a question is, would a change in government will change that direction the country is taking, the answer is obviously no, because it's been more than 50 years that we're doing this.
Okay. And beyond the transaction that we spotlighted at the beginning of this conversation, Gabon has also been part of another conversation specifically about getting paid for preserving forests. Gabon is a high forest, low deforestation country, which means it has a big part of intact forests. How is that conversation evolving? Where is it at now?
That conversation, it has more to do with net sequestration. Right? The fact that today, and it ties also into the conversation about additionality, where today we're having this ludicrous situation where we will get pushback as you cannot reasonably expect to be paid to let the forest do what the forest does. But the reality is someone has maintained that forest, because if not, if it was so easy, we would all have the forest today, right? And that forest, the fact that we preserved it is coming with tremendous co-benefits, such as the biodiversity, the gorillas, the elephants, which we do know their importance in the global biodiversity ecosystems. So I believe that the world will become reasonable about that, and the community, the financial community also will be reasonable about it and understand really what is at stake.
And I mean, you said it's not by accident you have that much forest. And to be clear, Gabon has 88% forest cover. What's it like to even live in a country or in a city that has that much forest?
At least you breathe properly, yeah?
Yeah.
But you should come and visit. You should come and visit.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it's one of the few capital city from where you can take a boat, 30-minute cruise, and you're in a national park with the elephant, the buffaloes, etc.
And as a result of this sale, do you see, or even the other climate finance steps that you're taking, do you see that helping you pay down some of the debt that Gabon has? And also, in terms of other countries, we're in a context where a lot of countries are facing debt issues. Now we have the possibility of the carbon market and that getting hopefully more accessible to African countries. What's your take from a Gabonese perspective, but also from a broader one?
Sure, very good question. Actually, Gabon, we already have, and this is also one of the reasons why the sovereign wealth fund was mandated to monetize those carbon credits, because we do have that vision and way to approach our capital, being infrastructure or natural capital, that it has to be transferred to future generation. So that's why the sovereign wealth fund is managing, leading the charge regarding the monetization of this carbon credit. Now, directly to your question, we do have a waterfall. As far as Gabon is concerned, we already have a waterfall enshrined in our finance law of how these funds will be allocated once we monetize those carbon credits. So just for conversation's sake, 25% of the revenues will go back to the forest, 15% to the people, 10% to the conservation effort. 25% will go into servicing our debt, 25% will go into building climate resilience and also social infrastructure for the country, healthcare and education, and 25% will come to the sovereign wealth fund as an endowment to the Fund of Future Generation. So that's what Gabon will do, and obviously all this is happening in the backdrop of political tension and economical turbulence with the increase in energy prices, the inflation, and also the debt affordability. So I would assume that all the remaining countries in the region are looking at how this initiative led by Gabon will evolve, and obviously it will also give them the right incentive, not if we succeed, but when we succeed, it will give them the right incentive to follow in our steps.
I have one more question,
Please.
But I just want to let everyone know to please keep the questions coming through the platform so that we can take audience questions once mine is answered. So my question is just to know about, you've mentioned part of the proceeds going towards debt payments, interest payments, and I'm just wondering in general, in terms of the revenue that you get from climate finance, do you see a point where that will overtake what you make from oil and gas?
That's the objective, and it will even go beyond carbon. It will go into biodiversity credit that today we don't know how to measure yet. It goes into IP for our plants, medical plants that are in the rainforest. And also you have to tie that into what Gabon has been doing for the past 10 years, which is really transforming its economy with the diversification. Oil and gas was representing, 10 years ago, oil and gas was 45% of our GDP. Today it's 38% of our GDP. So that's really the object, that's the destination, yeah.
Excellent.
But we need to ensure that we don't do that at the compromise of our development. And this is what it's all about.
We do have a question. How should a fair carbon price be worked out?
This is an interesting question because, how to say, it depends. It depends from which perspective you're taking it. If you ask me what is a fair price, I would say the highest price possible. Now, it depends on various elements. On the volumes, how much volumes are we talking about? The vintage, are we talking about carbon credit from 2011, 12, 13? Are we talking about closest one? So there's several elements which will come into play. If we're looking at carbon, sovereign carbon credits, there's a market. I would say there's some carbon credit that today are trading around $15 per ton. And so we believe that our carbon credit being the best out there should at least trade at a higher price, just to give an indication.
You kind of answered this question a little bit, but maybe some more specifics on what will you be doing with all of the revenue from the carbon,
Sorry?
What will you do with all the revenue from the carbon credits?
And I assume that this is just an informative question. It's not like a condition precedent, right? Because that also has to be clear. It's like, say, we have a clear waterfall, so we'll go, 25% will go back to the forest. So conservation efforts to the level of 10, 15% to the people, because one of the challenges that this preservation effort also creates is you can have also conflicts. For instance, in Gabon, we have man and elephant conflict, right? So we have to ensure that we create a sustainable and economical path for these populations in the forested areas, and servicing our debt, freeing up some budgetary space for the government to continue investing for the population and for the sovereign wealth fund so that we can keep on investing for future generations.
Brazil is expected to propose an OPEC for forests at COP. How does Gabon stand in relation to such a proposal?
We're part of the conversation.
90 million for a market that traded 200 last year. Are you worried you're going to flood the market?
Sorry, it's an interesting question, but the reality is, I think I mentioned it, we in the world where we have more than 52 billion tons of emissions every year. Today, a carbon market of 200 million obviously is not fit for purpose. So we need scale, we need speed, and that's why we need the sovereign carbon credit also to come into play. Yeah.
And you're here at COP. What are you hoping, what is the number one thing you're hoping to see come out of this COP?
I would say that we're living in trying times, you say, and the reality is the world is tired of commitment. Africa is tired of commitment. We're tired of trillions of dollars of commitment. What we really want now is billions of impact on the ground. And here again, we're not asking for handouts. We're bringing to the table a solution from Africa to the world. So now the question that we will have, or that we have when we're discussing with potential investors, is, for instance, there's no scenario where we keep the 1.5 degree alive without saving the rainforest. Right? There's no scenario. We can continue investing in, I don't know, electrical cars, carbon capture innovations. But all this will be irrelevant if we don't ensure that we preserve that last defense line that we have in that battle against climate change. And we're bringing a solution to the table, so now it's time to test the veracity of the commitment of the various parties. Today, Gabon has committed to remain Gabon has committed to never be net zero, so to remain sub-zero now, and we're willing and we're ready to be held accountable to that commitment. So now the question is, what is the commitment that we collectively taking to ensure that we ensure that we're not failing the future generation and that we still have a planet for them when they come around.
And I've heard in this COP that Gabon is really seen as a leader in that space at a continental level. And I'm just wondering what kind of conversations you're having with neighboring countries or countries on the continent in terms of them also being able to build that capacity to hopefully do similar sales.
We are, and for instance, this issuance that happened 3 weeks ago, it's the result of 3 years of work by our government and especially the Ministry of Environment. They work long and hard, and this is a science and methodology that we making available to our neighboring countries, because this is not the story of Gabon, it's the story of the world, right? And there's no win if we don't all win together, so, yeah.
I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you so much, Akim, for your time and for your insights.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone.